I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we are recording today. So um, we'll be posting this online for anyone who wasn't able to make it today. Um, so thank you all for coming today. My name is Karen Gravlin, and I am the library consultant for Inclusive Services, and I'm the director of the Able Library. This is an overview of Able Library Services. Um, we'll be looking at our newest collection, and we'll have a sneak peek at our new website, which I'm really excited to show you guys. You all will be the first librarians to see the new website, which is great. And so my goal today is to make sure that you just walk away with a better understanding of what the Able Library does and how we can help you better serve your patrons. All right, so as I mentioned today, I'll take you through an overview of the Able Library, what it is, some of its history, what we provide, and who we serve. I'll also talk about some of the other things we have going on at the Able Library and give you an update on what's new with us. And I'll leave time for questions at the end, but please feel free to stop me at any point if you have something you'd like to ask or you need me to clarify anything. I'm always happy to answer questions, so feel free to jump in at any time. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Able Library, we serve Vermonters with a visual or physical impairment that prevents them from reading standard print materials. We also serve people with print disabilities like dyslexia. We're a network library for the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, also known as NLS, and they are a division of the Library of Congress. And I believe at this point that every state has at least one network library that distributes NLS materials to their residents. We're also part of the Vermont Department of Libraries, and our mission is to offer accessible library materials to our patrons across the entire state of Vermont. And so we have three staff members. So there's me, I'm the director, and I do a lot of the outreach, training, developing partnerships, taking care of operational issues as they come up. Sarah Blow is our reader's advisor. And among many other things, she provides customer service to our patrons by handling circulation and reference requests. And she does that mostly over the phone or through email. She also does the bulk of our collection maintenance for our large print collection. Wendy Clark is our assistant librarian. She also wears many hats. She provides customer service as well, just like Sarah does, but she's also our cataloger and she manages our local recording program. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. So we have several different accessible formats for patrons. So we have digital audiobooks on cartridge, and those require the special digital machine from the NLS in order to play those. So if patrons choose to read in that format, we do send them we send them the machine when they sign up for service. And when a patron signs up with us, they let us know things like genres, subjects, or favorite authors that they like to read. And we include all of that in their profile on our integrated library system, or ILS. And so what happens is every day, as with most ILSs, our ILS keeps track of items that were returned and requests that have been made. And then every night, it creates a list of patrons who have returned books or requested new ones, and it pulls their reading preferences from their profiles, and then it assigns books to them based on those criteria. So when we come to work in the morning, and by we, I do mean mostly Wendy and Sarah, we upload books onto these cartridges and get them in the mail to be sent out to patrons. And we can fit up to about 8 books on one cartridge, and we frequently mail out multiple cartridges to patrons to make sure that they never run out of books to read. And that's also based on patron preferences. We do have folks who only want 1 or 2 books per cartridge, and we kind of tailor that to whatever the patron is comfortable with. On the slide, you can see a picture of the kind of machine that we use to upload books onto the cartridges. It's called a scribe machine, and we can create multiple cartridges at a time, which makes preparing the mail that much easier. Um, and the nice thing about this system is that patrons don't have to wait for a book. So because they're digital, we can put as many books, like the same book on as many cartridges as we need to, so that everyone who wants that book at the same time gets it. And that also means that patrons don't have to feel like they're keeping a book from someone else if they take a little longer to read it. And that system is definitely different from what most public libraries are used to with their ebook lending models. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. It's also a good way to promote the service to patrons. So we tell patrons all the time that there are no waiting lists for the audiobooks. You can get them as soon as you decide you want them and just let us know. And we also have a small collection of print Braille picture books for our patrons to check out. So they generally have the Braille, the standard print, and the pictures included. And they're sometimes called all-in-ones, if you've heard that phrase. These are great for Braille readers who want to read with young children or for children who are just learning Braille. But for Braille readers who want a larger variety or they want adult books, we contract with the Perkins Library in Massachusetts, and they're part of the Perkins School for the Blind. Like, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Um, So we get our patrons, we contract with the Perkins Library, which is part of the Perkins School for the Blind in Massachusetts, and they send our patrons Braille books through the mail for free. And we do this because Braille books take up a ton of room, and we just don't have the shelf space or capacity for a collection like that. So it's great that we can partner with Perkins to provide those books to patrons. We also offer large print books to our patrons. So as far as I know, we have the largest large print collection in the state. We have close to 10,000 titles available, and they include books for children, teens, and adults. So we used some of our IMLS ARPA money to refresh that collection. So we have a lot of newer books and replaced some of our more worn out copies. So if patrons have some vision and they still prefer reading print over listening to audiobooks, or if they have a reading disability like dyslexia, large print books might be a good option for them. The print is usually 16-point font or larger, and there's more space between the lines of text. We send these to our patrons in the mail free of charge, just like we do with the digital cartridges. And we also work with public libraries to provide large print deposit collections. So we send public libraries boxes of large print books that they can keep for 3 months to circulate to their own patrons before sending them back to us. And we do the same thing with libraries that we do with our individual patrons. So we create profiles for you and we can tailor the books we send based on what you think your patrons will be interested in. And you can also request specific books to be included in those deposit collections. And that can be a great option if you're having a book club, for instance, and you want to make sure you have a large print copy available for your patrons to check out. For patrons who use tablets or smartphones, we have the BARD app. BARD stands for Braille and Audio Reading Download. So with this app, patrons can download Braille and audio books directly to their mobile device. Obviously, it's convenient for patrons because they don't have to wait for the mail to get a book and they can listen to the books without the special player, which can be nice for some patrons. And we also have a small collection of audio described DVDs. And so these are DVDs where someone describes the action, the characters, costumes, things like that, any of the visuals without disrupting the actual dialogue of the movie. And we're no longer adding to this collection right now, but it is available for patrons who still prefer or need DVDs over streaming services. Fortunately, there are a lot of streaming services that do provide audio described movies and shows. So that's nice. And then we're also rolling out a new collection. It's called our Accessible Youth Collection. The name of the app is called BARD. So it stands for Braille and Audio Reading Download, and it's available in both Android and Apple, and you can just download them. Um, but we're also rolling out a new accessible youth collection. And so the collection has high contrast picture books and board books. And so the high contrast pictures are easier for children with visual impairments to see. And they may also be helpful for children with other reading disabilities, like because the illustrations are usually much simpler and they're less distracting, it can be helpful. And the collection will also have wonder books, which are they're picture books with an audio element that's attached to the book. So they're kind of like the next generation of picture books that used to come with cassettes or CDs in the back. And I know some public libraries in Vermont are starting to carry these. I think Vox is another company that makes similar books. Um, and with these, kids can listen to the audio as they flip through the pages of the book. And they're also great for parents or grandparents who have visual impairments but still want to read with the children in their lives. So they can use the book to listen together while the child flips through the pages. And it's just a great way to encourage family literacy. So we're really excited about that collection, and I'll talk more a little bit later about how libraries can get these books from us because it is a brand new collection, and I know people might have some questions about how to get them. Um, so I'll go over a brief history of the National Library Service, just so you have an idea of how it's evolved over the years. So the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled began in 1931, and it was started with an act that was passed in Congress to establish the service. And I just want to mention that because NLS was created through legislation, it can be challenging to change certain aspects of the service. A lot of times the change would require new legislation to be passed in Congress. And we know that that can be a process. So it can sometimes take a while for the organization to adapt, which means that it can sometimes take us a while to change as well. And I just want people to know this because I want you to be aware that we do hear feedback that would make the service better or easier to use, but we can't always act on that feedback without NLS's approval, and NLS can't always approve any changes without first having Congress essentially change the law. So that is sometimes why it can take a while. So initially, the NLS only provided books in Braille, but in 1933, audiobooks, or what they referred to as talking books, were developed on records. In 1952, the word adult was removed from the legislation for NLS, and that allowed them to provide service to readers of all ages. In 1966, services were extended to patrons with a physical disability that would prevent them from being able to read standard print materials. And by 1969, technology had advanced enough to begin recording books on cassette. And so from that point on, NLS began providing audiobooks on cassette and started moving away from records. In 1976, Vermont joined the NLS network and created the Vermont Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, which was called the Special Services Unit, and within the Department of Libraries. So we're actually probably one of the newest libraries in the state. In 2006, NLS began its transition to digital formats, which is essentially what we use today. So here in Vermont, we no longer circulate records or cassettes. Our entire audiobook collection is digital. 2013 was when the BARD app was first released. And so today, our services consist of a combination of those digital cartridges, BARD, Braille, large print books, and now our accessible youth collection. So along with our history, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about name changes. So when our library was created, as I mentioned, we were called the Vermont Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, or the Special Services Unit. But times change, and the way that we talk about people with disabilities changed, and staff kind of realized that we needed a new name to reflect that. So in 2018, our former director and our library advisory committee spearheaded our name change to the ABLE Library. And that was to focus more on what we actually offer to patrons. So ABLE is an acronym that stands for Audio, Braille, Large Print, and Electronic Books. Um, in a similar vein, NLS used to be the National Library Service for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, and they changed their name in 2019 to the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled. And that did require Congress to pass legislation for them to do that. So if you've heard of these services before and you were confused about the different names, I hope that that kind of clears it up a little bit. So why do we use these special formats? So NLS is exempt from some copyright law thanks to the legislation that Congress passed. So this gives them the right to record print material into an audio format and translate it into Braille without needing to get permission from the publishers or pay any fees. Um, and on top of that, the US became a full participant in what's called the Marrakesh Treaty. So we joined the Marrakesh Treaty in 2019, and that lets similar library services in other countries share their materials with us and vice versa. And that's great because this gives our patron access to foreign language audiobooks and Braille books from around 81 different countries, which the NLS would never have been able to produce on their own. Um, but because of that, because we're exempt from copyright law and we're sharing books from other countries, we are required to make sure that only people who qualify for the service have access to those materials. And so that's why we have that application process. That's why we have the special formats that not everyone can use. And I mentioned this before to people, but if a patron accidentally loses a digital cartridge, you can't play it on a standard machine. You can't plug it into your stereo or your car radio and listen to it. You do need the special digital player from NLS. And then only qualified patrons receive access to BARD as well. So even though you can download the app directly from the App Store, you still need to set up an account with us first before you can access anything that's on there. And that just helps to prevent misuse of the service, and it keeps us in the clear with the copyright laws. And so MLS, they have their own collection development department, and the librarians who work in that department decide which books to produce based on what they know patrons will be interested in, as well as direct requests from patrons and network libraries like us. So in that respect, the book selection process is pretty similar to what public libraries do. They just try to anticipate what patrons will want, but it's just kind of like on a national level instead of, more locally. So we don't necessarily get to choose all of the books that are produced by NLS. Um, Narrators come into NLS's recording studio and they record the audiobooks, but they're required to read the entire book from cover to cover. So they're not allowed to make any changes to what's in the book, in the text of the book. So everything is just straightforward. But that's why some patrons get annoyed because it will read the title page and all of the copyright information and the dedication page, and that's because they have to. So then once it's recorded, NLS staff edit the audio tracks, including making natural stopping points at the ends of chapters, and that just makes it easier for patrons to navigate through a book. They encrypt the file so that it's only accessible to eligible users. And then they upload the file to their database where network libraries like us can download them and put them onto cartridges for our patrons, send them out, or patrons can download them directly onto their devices through the BARD app. Um, and recently, as e-audiobooks have become more popular, NLS has started purchasing commercially produced audiobooks to add to their collection. And that's through special agreements with some publishers. So that means that patrons don't have to wait the months that it can sometimes take for NLS to record the audio version of a print book. A lot of times now the publishers release the print and audiobooks at the same time. So new books are accessible to patrons right away in some cases. Not all the time, but some of the time now, which is better than it was before. So for Braille books, Once a book is selected to be brailled, the analyst produces braille copies of books both in physical format and digitally. And digital braille books can be downloaded by patrons on Bard. So there are several conditions that can qualify a patron for able library services. People who are blind, people with a visual impairment that prevents them from reading standard print materials, people with a physical impairment that prevents them from reading standard print materials. And so that could be anything from a stroke, Parkinson's, paralysis, shoulder surgery, carpal tunnel, even arthritis. So the way that I think about it is if a person has any physical impairment, that keeps them from being able to hold a book or turn its pages, they're qualified for able services. People with a perceptual or reading disability like dyslexia also are qualified for able services. And so conditions can be temporary or permanent. So, for example, I mentioned a stroke. So if a patron has a stroke, they can qualify for service until they've regained enough mobility to read standard print materials again, and then they can discontinue service. And then on the other hand, we have patrons who have permanent or lifelong conditions, and they're patrons for many years. Um, so when a patron fills out an application for the ABLE library, there is a section that requires a signature from what we call a certifying authority. Um, and so the certifying authority is signing the application to say that the person applying does indeed have a condition that qualifies. So in the past, the only people who could certify an application were doctors and other medical professionals. The NLS recently changed that to include teachers, social workers, and librarians, among others. And the full list of people who can sign an application is on our website. So if you have a patron who you know has a certifying condition, you can sign their application yourself instead of having to send them to their doctor to get it signed. And please don't worry if you end up signing an application for someone and it turns out that their condition doesn't qualify. It can sometimes be tricky to talk about medical conditions with patrons, and people can be kind of hesitant about sharing that kind of information. So what we do is when we receive an application, we contact every single patron who sends an application to us. And so we do kind of like that final screening before their application is officially accepted. So we can certainly handle those kinds of situations as they come up. So just throwing that out there that you don't need to worry. So a lot like public libraries, we run programs in addition to providing library materials. So we currently have a book club that meets every other month, and we meet on Microsoft Teams. But for people who don't have internet or computer or who don't feel comfortable using that technology, patrons can also just call in, just like Zoom. And we're always happy to welcome new members to that group. We also co-host a program called Memorable Times Cafe with the Central Vermont Council on Aging, and that meets on the first Wednesday of every month. And really, it was designed for people with memory loss, and they can attend the program along with their care partner. Pre-COVID, the program met in person at the Vermont Historical Society building, but it's currently still virtual. And we usually have a theme to help prompt conversation. So, for example, September's theme is Stick Around, and we're going to be talking about sports that involve a bat or stick. And that's why you see that picture on the slide. And we usually have music and videos that are associated with a theme that we think patrons will recognize and might, prompt them to have conversations. We also offered a summer reading program for the first time this past summer. So we had access to Beanstack, we had adapted summer reading lists, and we had accessible activities that we provided to patrons. And so some of the other projects that are ongoing, the National Library Service does a great job of keeping up with technology and kind of envisioning new ways to use that technology for our patrons. So right now, NLS is working on a Braille e-reader pilot, and you might be wondering what a Braille e-reader is. So it looks a little bit like a small keyboard, and one of the models is pictured on the slide, so you can kind of get an idea what it looks like. So the keys are movable. and they can display 20 characters at a time. So you can't even read an entire tweet in one line of Braille on these, but it displays 20 characters, and then the reader can hit the next button and it'll display the next 20 characters. Um, and so some of our Vermont patrons have already received those new Braille e-readers and are learning how to use them. And we're pretty excited about NLS providing this new equipment because it's really quite expensive to purchase commercially. They're around $2,000 if you wanted to buy it on your own. And I know that NLS's eventual goal is to send out Braille e-readers to any NLS patron who wants one. They're also working on a voice user interface to allow for playback of audiobooks on devices like Amazon Echo or Google Home. And that would be useful for patrons who, have mobility or dexterity issues and have difficulty operating a digital machine or a mobile device. Here at the Able Library, we have a local recording program, which allows us to record books ourselves. So we typically choose titles of Vermont interest, so books that are by a Vermont author, about Vermont, or set in Vermont. And usually these are books that we know the NLS is not interested in producing themselves because there's just not the national interest for those books. Our narrators are volunteers, and we have a recording studio at the Department of Libraries, but we also have at-home recording equipment that we recently purchased so that our volunteers can record books at home as well. And another project we're working on here at the Able Library is a new website, and it is live at this point, and I'm really excited about it because it's something I've been working on since last fall. So it's rated at the highest level of accessibility, and we're hopeful that it'll be a helpful resource for patrons and for our partners like public libraries. And you all will get to see that after this portion of the overview. And so we rely very heavily on partnerships for patron referrals and just to spread awareness about our services. So we work with most of our patrons remotely because our patrons live all over the state and they may have a hard time securing transportation to come visit us. So we don't generally help folks in person. And really, it's our partners who do work directly with people who often tell people about us and help people sign up. So public and school libraries, they continue to be great partners in sharing our resources with patrons, helping patrons apply for service with us. And one thing that we offer to libraries is the ability to have an institutional account with us, which is how we check out our deposit collections to libraries. We also partner with other organizations that serve people with disabilities, as well as assisted living facilities and nursing homes. They refer patrons to us all the time, and we recommend their services to patrons when they need them. And one of our biggest partners that I want to recognize is the US Postal Service. So our physical material gets to patrons through the mail, which we are able to send at no cost thanks to a postal program called Free Matter for the Blind or Handicapped. So instead of a stamp, we print Free Matter for the Blind or Handicapped on whatever it is that we're sending out, and it gets mailed for free. And it's also free for our patrons to return materials to us through the mail. And it's a really great service, and we wouldn't be able to do what we do without them. So as promised, I wanted to talk a little bit more about our accessible youth collection, which is a brand new collection that we were able to purchase with some IMLS ARPA money. So as you can see from the pictures on the slide, the high contrast pictures are really easy to distinguish. And if you look at the picture of the Wonder Book, you can see the audio player is attached to the inside cover of the book, and patrons can just press the play button. You can also plug in headphones. I think it's just a regular audio jack plug-in. You can just plug them right in. So kids can listen to the books in the library if they wanted to without disturbing other patrons. We are working on making these items available through interlibrary loan, and we'll let you all know as soon as that's an option. So right now, individual able patrons can check out 2 Wonder Books at a time. And there are a couple of reasons for this. So the first is that they're relatively expensive. So one Wonder book costs between $50 and $60. So we wanted to make sure that if something happened to the books that a patron had checked out, that we wouldn't need to replace hundreds of dollars worth of books. And the other reason is that the collection is small at this point, and so we wanted to make sure that we still have enough books on the shelf to be able to send patron books as they request them. Um, Libraries who want to try out a deposit collection of the accessible youth materials, we are sending 4 Wonder books and 4 high contrast picture books at a time. And we also send out a charger for the Wonder books to libraries, and we recommend that patrons not be able to check out the charger. So best practice is that when a patron returns a Wonder book, you charge it before you put it back on the shelf. Each book can be listened to about 50 times before it needs to be charged, so it shouldn't be an issue for most patrons. And we also suggest that you limit patrons to 1 or 2 Wonder books at a time for the same reasons that I just mentioned. And just like the large print, we're planning on making these deposit collections you available to check out for 3 months at a time. And then once you return the deposit collection, we'll send out a fresh set of books. And you can always return the deposit collection sooner if you're ready for new books. And so at this point, I would like to show you our new website. Can somebody just let me know if you can see the website?
I can see it.
Thank you. So the first thing that I want to make you just put on your radar is the URL. So it's just able.vermont.gov. And that was so that it was easy to find, easy for patrons to remember. And it doesn't live under the Department of Libraries website anymore. So it's a standalone website. We'll still have a tab on the Department of Libraries website with, some information about the Able Library and then a link to our website, so that people know that we haven't moved. We're still part of the Department of Libraries, but we're just using our own standalone website just because it's easier for patrons to navigate. And then the other thing too is that, as I mentioned before, it's at the highest level of accessibility. We were using the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is their international standards for accessibility. So it's screen reader friendly. All of the pictures have alternative text. And it's also, the readability is at about an 8th grade level. So you'll see shorter sentences, $1 words instead of $5 words. And that was all just to make it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. So the homepage just has a quick blurb about what our services, buttons on how to apply, request books, search the catalog. We have a news feature, so you can see what our latest book club is, our latest newsletter, any sorts of updates that we get from NLS that we feel patrons or libraries might be interested in. And then down at the bottom of every page, we have contact information for us, a link to NLS, the Department of Libraries, and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Up on the left hand here is our menu. So we have the About page that just goes into more detail on what the Able Library does. Eligibility, so this is where people can find out who qualifies and who can sign their applications. Here under Apply for Services, that's where you'll find our applications. And we did create new applications to kind of go along with the new website. So we have 2 different applications. One is for individual patrons, and the other is for institutions like libraries, schools, nursing homes. And these applications are fillable PDFs, so you can fill them out online and email them to us if that's easier, or you can print them out and fill them out by hand. So whichever works for you and your patrons works for us. And we'll still use if someone sends in an application using the old application, we won't turn that away, but the newer applications might be a little bit easier. Under collections, it just talks about the different collections that we have and kind of a little blurb on what they are. Request books has all of the ways that you can request the books from us. You can call, you can mail, you can email, you can log on to our online catalog. There's a link here. And then just some information to have when you're calling or sending mail to us about what we need so that we can get your books to you. We have an equipment tab that just talks about the different equipment that NLS provides, our digital players, the Braille e-reader. And something that I didn't talk about in the overview is that there are other accessories that patrons can request from us to help them use the players better. So we do have things like breath switches, and that controls like the play and stop functions on those players. We have things like headphones, high volume players for people who have hearing loss, pillow speakers that can be used when a patron is bedridden. And then we have a tab that's specifically for libraries and schools. So this just talks about, what's available through interlibrary loan, what deposit collections are available. Schools have kind of some different guidelines and some different things that they have to meet with us before they can have an account with us. And so there's more information on that, how to request outreach from us, and just some links on inclusive programming if that's something that you're interested in offering at your library. And then the last tab is just additional resources. So we have some accessibility resources like the New England ADA Center, which is great, as well as all of our partner organizations that we work with, and just quick blurbs about them. So that's our new website. I'm super excited about it. So does anyone have any questions? I know, I'm sorry, it's kind of like a lot to lay out all at once, but if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Bree, I can have your hand up.
Yes, I actually have two questions. The first question is, we are redoing our website, and is there a way that we can check to see if it's ADA compliant or how much percentage it is or what we still need to do? Is there some kind of like, you can enter the URL and run it through something, or?
I'm not really aware, Bree, of a resource that will do like the whole website. I know that you can do things like copy and paste into Word, and that'll tell you what your readability level is at. But I worked with the state contracts with website developers, and so I kind of worked with them, and they did more of the web structure. So, but it is something that I can look into, and I can send you more information if I find anything.
That would be great, because that's definitely one of our focuses on redoing our website. And the other thing, in the past, we don't have that many patrons who are need the Braille, but we have a lot of patrons who are deaf. We have several like big users of the library, and I'm wondering what resources you provide for folks who are deaf.
So it's unfortunate, but we don't really have a lot. Like I mentioned that we have those the high volume players, so that for people who are experiencing hearing loss, and then because the National Library Service deals mostly with people who their original purview was people with vision impairment. That's kind of what we focus on. But I know that there are resources within the state that I can refer you to. The Department for Aging and Independent Living has an entire section that's dedicated to services for people who are deaf, hard of hearing. And there's a wonderful person who's in charge of that, and she's, super excited, gung ho about helping libraries. So I can put you in contact with her.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's been a hole that's been needing to fill. And I never would have looked under aging because these are not old patrons. They're
Right, right,
deaf patrons.
right.
Thank you.
Absolutely. It looks like Lynn had a question. I'm curious if Able is working directly with engineers at MIT or others who specifically develop equipment for the same populations you've been working to help. Um, so most of the equipment that we get comes directly from NLS because they kind of have the budget, and so they can do things like work with engineers to create technology that would be helpful to our patrons. So we don't necessarily work directly with them, um, but at the same time, I guess we wouldn't be opposed to it if that was something that, came up in the future. Um, Almi, I hope that's how you pronounce your name. Do you have posters, shelf talkers, display material libraries can get to advertise your services in the library? So right now we do have brochures that we just had produced a few months ago that we can send out to libraries. The shelf talkers and other posters and stuff, that's something that I really want to work on. And we're hoping the department right now is hiring for someone who's kind of like administrative assistant and communications. And so I'm hoping that that person can really help me develop some materials that we can send out to libraries to help promote the service. And then Bree, it looks like Susanna has a resource that might be helpful.
If you could read it out loud, that would be great because I don't have access to the chat.
Oh, sure. Yes, it's accessibleweb.com. So that might be a place where you can go and see if your website is meeting accessibility standards.
Thank you.
Mhm. Eileen says, I'm a college librarian in Vermont, private nonprofit. Can I refer patrons to you who are students at my institution but are not Vermont residents? So the short answer is yes, because um, the network libraries, we work very closely with each other. So sometimes, because we have patrons who do things like, go to Florida for the winter and then come back to Vermont in the summertime. So we work closely and kind of transfer patrons between us so that we can make sure that they're continuing to get service. So you can send them to us, and then even if it turns out that we are not the right people to help them, we will connect them with, the right library for them, however their situation kind of shakes out. Um, Eric says, I'm not sure I've seen able materials on Clover. Can your large print items be found through the standard search, or do they need to be requested through VTlib? So they are on Clover. I kind of have a hard time finding them on Clover too, but if you search for a title and large print is available, I think it comes up under it's Vermont State Library, and then in parentheses it says able. So they are available through interlibrary loan, but you can also request them directly from us, and we can send them out to you. So it's kind of whatever's easier for you, we're happy to do. So you can go onto our website and search